Recording started. Wait for the intro. We'll go on. That is a really amazing intro, isn't it? So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Here we go again with another stream weekend tech talk in this beautiful day. And salam salam, we always give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we are also going to give away a little bit of numbers here with someone with the we're going to say thanks also to someone with the credit card number of 548-7422-5186-2831 with an expiration date of 625 and a CVV of 886. We would like to say thanks a lot to those who belong to this card. And we have our material here, our speaker, Raka Sabta Fabian, which he will tells us a lot about the philosophy of the software engineering. And we oftenly given materials after materials, consuming more and more stuff, detail about the software things, software sites, but no one talks about how it works, how the philosophy thinks about it. And yeah, we also need to think about how the philosophy of RFPL really is, because it's important for our life later. Okay, for time and place, I shall give to you.
Thank you, Akmal Pratama, for introducing me, and also thanks to our sponsor there. So, my name is Raka Sapta Fabian, and before we start, I would like to thank our God, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has guided us and also given us mercies and blessings. And secondly, salawat and salam be given to our Prophet, our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He is the one, the only Prophet of the universal world. He has given us many things through Allah. And this era of Islam and also other stuff is very good. So let's get right on to the topic. All right, so I will be presenting the screen right now, which is in this window right here. There we go. So we're going to be talking about something very interesting, actually. Ever heard or even thought about something as very weird as this. But this is quite interesting. Philosophy of game development, or the philosophy of game dev for sure. There you go. All right, maybe no need for a line here. So many of you may be asking, what is care about this? Well, you see, game development and games in general in the modern era has a very big impact to the world, and it may change the course of humanity as we know it. Game development is basically the process of making a software known as a game, something that is probably enjoyed and played by players or users like you. So video game development, sometimes shortened as game dev, like I said, is the process of creating a video and practice involving programming and also design, art, audio, and interface. There's very, very many parts of game development. It's not just coding and just art. So now, if we're going to be talking about game development, it is also a subgenre of software engineering or RPL, which is my major. And I took game development because I found it very interesting and also very fun in personally. So let's get right on to the topic. So this is the philosophy of game development. Let me just write something. So let me draw something you've probably seen before. though I'm not sure if many of you will recognize it. What do you think is this? Now, many of you will say that this looks like a block, and then that looks like a gear, and you're right. But the majority will, of course, recognize this as a human head. Why are we even talking about a human head right now? Well, let me say, this head is part of game development. It is in your brains. It is the philosophy of game development. Now, the philosophy of how games are made is pretty complex topic that I'm going to be talking about that involves various perspectives and also approaches, which is why I'm going to be citing a few people as well, because it's not just me making games for people. You see, here's some of the key points that you should know about making a game. First of all, this is from a narratological perspective. Now, some game developers, like me, approach games as something like a text. A text? Why should we care? Well, a text, deploying theoretical frameworks from the study of narrative, fiction, and rhetoric to interrogate games for their representational content. Wow, this is a very weird script I wrote. So, they focus on plot, character development, and also narrative. So, the first part is that games are sometimes made as told from a narrator perspective, which is like games focused on stories perspective. This you've probably played one yourself if you've been up with the game industry for probably this decade and before. Games that is played from a narratological or narrator perspective, that's much more easier to say, is quite interesting because not only do they employ the uses and tactics of what we would say is used in stories, but from novels and also, well, basically any kind of fictional or a story-based uh, thing, then it is implemented into a game or a software uh, and type of stuff like this. Now that's just one of the first perspective of what games may be. There's also the ludological perspective. Other street games has a distinctive type of media that are primarily defined by their gameplay mechanics. So the people who try to encourage it or maybe have this perspective are called ludologists. Ludologists. Okay? That's quite hard to pronounce, but that's just what it says. Now, ludologists maintains that games are unique media and that they are best understood by focusing them on the modes that is interactivity and also try to distinguish them. So this is a much more a radical perspective, you could say, or maybe not. Ludological. Did I use the line there? No. So they think that games are much defined by how they're played and their gameplay mechanics. So say a person right here plays a video game. These ludologists think that why games are games and why they're made and why games are games as we know it is because from their gameplay mechanics and how they play. The interactivity of the players and the game is essential in this perspective, which is why they will probably prefer much more action games rather than narrative perspective driven games. But this also depends on the type of gameplay that the games are made as. Now, there's also other perspectives, of course, such as games that are thought as experiments. Experiments in games? I mean, games are just child's play. Why do we need experiments? Well, games are much more interesting than you had probably previously think. Now, games can be interpreted as a virtual thought experience akin to a narrative thought experiment that we commonly use in philosophy and other disciplines to explore counterfactuals. Now, video games are usually not designed to test specific philosophical problems and narrative, or as narratives, thought problems. But yeah, nevertheless, they can function pretty normally as thought experiments when they are interpreted as modeling philosophical problems. So, from a much more experimental perspective, you could say. Let's write it here. Experimental perspective. Now, the experimental perspective of game development is that they think us as test subjects, you could say. Now, this is quite interesting and may also connect some way in the logical perspective or the narrative-based perspective. Because this basically tests the philosophies of stuff on games. Say, you probably heard of the trolley problem. Oh, that's fun. Let's throw that here. So there's a trolley. Oh no, there's a train that is above some reason. So you see, this is someone who's going to be absolutely crushed. But there's a thing, you can change the outcome. Maybe you want to kill a baby instead. Like you want this baby to die in order to save this person. Oh, which one do I pick? This is quite a very philosophical problem as to morality and stuff like that, which is why it's called the experimental perspective. It's trying to see what players might think about a certain problem. Like they may think, which one is better? Well, I mean, if you say myself, like both of these problems are quite complex because they're not just defined as, oh, okay, if I say the baby is man is alive and this one's probably dead. No, it's a much more deeper than you might probably think, which is why it's quite important that this experimental perspective is much more, uh, yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, I guess that's just the experimental perspective. I'm not going to go very deep into it since there's other stuff that I'm going to be talking about. Now, there's also games as moral simulations. What is an experimental perspective technically this one? Well, you could say they're quite similar, but if we're going to be talking about much more in depth of moral simulations, video games are made up of counterfactual narratives that test the player. Here, a scenario. What would you do? Unlike in books, in films, and television, games allows you to act on your intuition. So, moral simulation perspective. Like the experimental one, except this one is much more based on the morals of human mind. Well, the troll problem technically belongs in this one as well. But if you want a much more moral simulation, let's say you're a soldier. Uh, yeah, you're a soldier who's going to war. Now, this is just an example. It's not trying to mention anyone or any groups of people. Now, you see, there's someone like you see a man who is dying and he is an enemy soldier who's probably fallen, wounded. And in this type of scenario, you might probably be thinking, should I kill this guy or not? Now, of course, let's see, there you go, like this. Now, this type of gameplay is called a moral simulation perspective based gameplay. Why? Because it's basically trying to see what the player will pick. Will you save this guy or will you shoot him? But then you think about the moral implications of what would happen if you pick one of these. First of all, if you save him, he will probably die of bleed in the first place. So you should put him out of his misery. But then you thought about the rules of war. You cannot shoot wounded people. So you're just gonna have to let him bleed or not. Like this is very fascinating. Like there's no other media that could probably provoke you as much as games do. because games, they are you are put into the story, which is why these types of games and simulations are so much more complex and also very fun. Well, not very fun, I would say. I mean, it's not wrong to have fun in these games, but they're much more complex and they're not just child's games. Now, while a lot of games are marketed towards a certain demographic like children, it is also very important to think about the moral implications of what games are made to be. That's why I'm talking about the philosophy of game dev, because not only does it change the whole story and the whole gameplay narrative of the game that you're playing, but it is also very incognitive into the human mind. And this is a very, very fun and interesting. Not express enough of why this thing is very interesting. Now, after that, we'll be talking about the other side. The other side. What are you talking about? Well, let me just create a new file or new storyboard. Because you see, in these types of gameplay, that might just be related to the story or the games, you could say. But this one is much more different because it talks about the gameplay. Now, there's two types of gameplay usually. There's the mechanical gameplay, and then there's also the reactionary gameplay. Here I'll describe it reactionary gameplay. Two different types of gameplay. Now, mechanical gameplay is when you, as a developer, want the player to experience a set types of event or handle a specific challenge. It's about setting up every element exactly how the player should experience it. Classic games and many AAA games today feature this kind of gameplay. The key element here is that the design of the game only allows for one way to succeed or having one best way that works every single time. That's what's called a mechanical gameplay. So it follows a set of rules in the story that the player would have to follow if they want to finish or win the game itself. So let's say you're basically uh there's two doors. One of the door here says, "Oh, this one is safe," while the other one is a staircase to hell. Wow, which one would the player pick? This is the type of mechanical gameplay because it wants the player to follow and progress through the story into what the game developer wants them to go through. And if they choose the other one, the ones that the game dev doesn't really intend you to pick, then they'll be sent to hell. And that's the dramatic of it. But that's basically what a mechanical gameplay is. It follows a set of rules and also follows a certain story that branches into other stuff that could be related to these ones in here. And then there's also the reactionary gameplay. These involve games that introduce random elements which cannot be 100% predicted, and it goes to the player to figure it out and how to react and adapt. So the reactionary gameplay is much more random, you could say, because not only is it not controlled by the game developer themselves, but it's it follows a certain pattern or set of code that randomizes stuff like events. Like, oh god, this player is being attacked by this thing right here. How would the player react? Depends on them. They can shoot it or maybe they cannot. And then, oh no, no, so suddenly raining and you got zapped in a football stadium. Well, it doesn't make any sense. That's what reactionary gameplay is, because it's probably random. So that's the two main gameplays mechanics that you could probably find in games that you play. These philosophies are not mutually exclusive, and many games blend elements of both. The choice between a mechanical and a reactionary gameplay often depends on the type of experience the game's designer wants to create for the player. So, for example, a narrative-driven game might learn more about or might lean more towards a mechanical gameplay in order to ensure that the story unfolds in a specific way, while strategy game like Hearts of Iron 4 might incorporate much more reactionary gameplay to challenge the player's decision-making skill. In addition to these philosophies, the process of world building and also constructing the fictional world in which the story will take place is also a fundamental part of game design. Well, we're not going talking about game design. This is are just the philosophies of it. But this can range from creating an entirely new universe with their own story and laws of nature to slightly upping the details of our own story and world to fit the story. So that is basically what these things are. Let's get back to the main topic. So after that, I guess that's just basically all I have to say about this topic in the philosophy of game development. So what did we learn from this? I'm not sure. I mean, you could probably appreciate games more for what they are instead of just, underappreciated stuff, you could say. And yeah, I suppose that's it. Thank you for listening to me. And let's get back to the main show. And yes, thank you.
So that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's only been 21 minutes on this conversation. So, any other words, message that you have to say about those Yaf outside that wants to go to probably are confused. They either want it to be game developer or an Android developer. Just make this time as a discussion time, please. So, what do you think about that? Give them a motivation. So.
I think you should pursue whatever you want to be because you see, I'm not forcing you to a certain degree or anything, but I think that it's like I said before, that the moral implication of philosophy of gameplay is like, okay, what the hell am I saying? But let's just say that, yeah, be good.
So just keep trying and trying. So could you please describe a little bit more about the impact of a game development? Because as you see right now, the harsh reality is, well, people often ended up playing games and wasting their times at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So aren't you
Now,
aware that I'm just talking it as my own perspective? Aren't you aware that what you will be making is it going to be useful for most people or it doesn't? Because most companies right now, because as far as I see, the strategy of the game development company is that they will be able to dictate, and when they get addicted, is those in-game purchases they'll purchase over and over again in their digital items. That's how they make profits. Correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah, that's a very interesting question. Now, see, games are, in fact, just like any other softwares. And okay, we're back. So, like I said, yes, I think some of your statements there are true that games are quite addicting, and the market today is pushing out these addictive games that affects people's life, like you said, and that could be potentially like, is this useful for you? Like, why should you even play games in the first place? Now, see, it depends on the person. Now, I think some of the marketing and also the how game companies produce these weird mechanics that aim towards a much more addictive style of engagement that eventually turns the player into a mindless creature that always play their games 24/7.
Yeah,
Like, have you
it's
seen
concerning.
those people who play Team Fortress 2? They play for over 1,000 hours of their lives.
Yeah.
Now, this style of stuff obviously unhealthy, but then again, it comes back to how the player engages. So game developers may create a good game that can be played once and then boom, it's over. You have a good experience and then you don't have to play it again. Or some could create a much more replayable game that is quite addicting and gets the player to, well, spend their lives just playing the game itself. Now, moral implications of this is, well, depends from person to person. Some say that this is quite bad, but some say that, well, that they want to enjoy their life like that, and sure. But personally, I think it's about healthy consumption of games. You know, games are like coffee. If you consume too much coffee, it might be bad for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess that's just my perspective on it.
Okay. Thank you very much for today's meeting, today's talk. I hopefully the audience can get more insights and more knowledges on this philosophy of the game development because no one talks about this nowadays really. Okay. Thank you very much for watching. Come on, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.